Hey friends! Last week in math, we were focusing on the customary system of measurement, which we use here in the United States. Now that means that we are looking at inches, feet, and yards. Now this week, we're going to shift from focusing on the customary system to the metric system, which is the system they use pretty much everywhere else in the world except for here. Now that means that we're going to be zooming in on centimeters and meters. Today's objective is, today we'll determine the appropriate tool to measure an object in metric units of length. Now it's your turn to repeat the objective back to me. Ready, set, go. Today we'll determine the appropriate tool to measure an object in metric units of length. Sounds great. Now it's time for us to go over our important vocabulary for today's lesson. The first word is centimeter. Can everybody say centimeter? Nice job. Now, centimeter can be abbreviated to cm period. Remember, an abbreviation is just a shortened way of writing something. Now, a centimeter is a small metric unit of length. It's about the width of your pinky finger. And we measure centimeters using a ruler. Our second vocabulary word for today is meter. Can everybody say meter? Great job. Now, meter can be abbreviated or shortened to m period. 1 meter is 100 centimeters total, and it's about the length of your arm span. We measure meters using a meter stick, which is slightly longer than a yardstick. Or we could also use a tape measure. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see an image at the top of a pinky finger. It's labeled 1 centimeter to remind you that a centimeter is about the width of your pinky finger. It's not an exact measurement, it's an estimate, meaning it's really close. Below that image, you can see our classroom ruler, so I've labeled it ruler. Now, you might have noticed, I also flipped it around from yesterday, so now the centimeters are labeled on top and the inches are at the bottom. Looking closely at that image, what do you notice, by the way, about the difference between centimeters and inches? If you observed that centimeters are about half the size of an inch, you're totally right. That means centimeters are a smaller unit than the inch. Down below, you can see an image of a silly person holding a piece of yarn with her arms wide open. That's to remind you that 1 meter is about the length of an arm span. But like the pinky measurement, it's just an estimate. It's not exact. Now, 1 meter is also about the length of 3 rulers, but plus a little extra. 1 meter is also equal to 100 centimeters. Don't forget that detail. Now, just like our lesson last week, there are some steps for you to follow to do measuring using the metric system. So, for today, you need to, 1, decide if the object should be measured in centimeters or meters, and then 2, decide which measuring tool would be most appropriate. So a ruler, a meter stick, or a tape measure. Now we don't only have to remember those steps, we also have to remember these rules for measuring. Now using the metric system, for small objects we would use a ruler and we would measure in centimeters. Now, for medium and larger objects, we would use a meter stick or a tape measure, and we would measure using meters. Unlike the customary system, the metric system only has 1 unit that we would use for both medium and large objects, meters. Now I'm going to model a couple of problems for you. The directions at the top of the page say, determine the best unit of measurement and tool to use. Number 1 says, which tool and metric unit should be used to measure an eraser? So underneath, there's a spot that says unit of measurement and a blank line, and then a spot for me to write in my tool. To answer this question, I thought it would be really helpful to show you an eraser. So I have Jaya's eraser here, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, Jaya's eraser is a pretty small object. It's not nearly as large as our pocket chart or the length of our classroom. So I'm trying to figure out which unit of measurement I would want to use from the metric system to measure Jaya's eraser. Well, I would probably go with centimeters, since meters are used for larger objects, like the length of our classroom. Now, as far as the tool goes, I'm looking at Jaya's eraser, and I'm thinking it's pretty small. So if I were to use a meter stick, you can see that this meter stick is way longer than Jaya's eraser. I could definitely use it and it would work just fine, but it seems kind of silly to use such a large measuring tool to measure a really small object. So what I would prefer to use is actually one of our rulers, because it's just long enough to measure the eraser, but it's not so long that I could use it to measure a really big object like our classroom. Now, for number 2, it says, which tool and metric unit should be used to measure a desk? Then it has a spot for me to write in the unit of measurement I choose, so either centimeters or meters, and it has a spot for my tool, so either a ruler, a meter stick, or a tape measure. Now, I'm sitting in front of Nina's desk, and yes, I did rearrange the tables just a little bit, but I am sitting in front of Nina's desk, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, wow, Nina's desk isn't a small object like Jaya's eraser, but it's also not a huge object. But then I remembered for the metric system, it doesn't matter if it's medium-sized or large because you measure using the same unit and the same tool. So for this object, I would probably use a meter stick, the longer one. It's a lot longer than a ruler, 3 times as long in fact, and so it's just more efficient to go with something that's bigger so that I don't have to use a placeholder to measure. So on my worksheet, I wrote the word meters for my unit of measurement, and as for my tool, I wrote meter stick. Now it's time for you to try out using the metric system in your independent practice pages. So you'll head over to Google Classroom, and as always, you have 2 options. Option 1 is to print off the worksheets and to complete them by hand. Don't forget, as part of option 1, you also still have to do the presentation, so be sure to follow that Seesaw link. If you choose option 2, that means that you're going to edit the templates on Seesaw. Then, after you edit the templates, make sure that you also do your student presentation. We're doing our presentations today for our final check for understanding. And today there's also a bonus activity. So if you're interested in doing some extra measurement today, be sure to check out the bonus activity. Good luck!